But why be a Christian at all? I'm sure some of you have heard people say, religion is not the solution, religion is the problem. How many people have heard someone say that? It's becoming more and more a common theme. And there's certainly enough evidence of it. We know that the Catholic Church put Galileo under arrest for preaching the truth. Well, it was house arrest, but it was still arrest. We know about the Inquisition. We know about a history of anti-Semitism. There's many complaints, some debate, of course, whether enough was done during the Holocaust by the Christian community. We know about the Crusades, which again, there's much debate about that. But we know about religious wars, and we know about the Catholic Church's sex abuse scandal. We also know it's common for people to say, well, Jesus' ideas were good, but there's no one who really follows them. Some people say, well, those Christians are a bunch of phonies. You know, they have big cathedrals and robes, but they don't really do anything. Now, we know that historically Christians have made more than their share of mistakes. There was a pope named Formosus who in the 800s was so unpopular that after he died, they exhumed his body and put him on trial. That's how angry they were. Needless to say, he was found guilty. Mark Twain once said, all the flotillas of the world could sail comfortably just on the blood that has been shed by Christians. That may be a bit of hyperbole, but I would offer to you that all the flotillas of the world could certainly sail comfortably on the sweat of Christians who have fought for peace. And I don't think that is said quite enough. Put another way, George Orwell once said, millions sleep peaceably at night because rough men still stand ready to do violence to protect them. That's true. But I would suggest that millions also sleep peaceably at night because of the many Christians who have made peace on their behalf over the years and developed the frameworks of peace. And I don't want to say that it's only Christians. I think any religion could give this kind of talk and could find people of peace and justice. But my focus today is Christianity. In fact, I would go so far to say that those cynics and atheists who largely take the value of Christianity for granted today sleep under a blanket of peace and under a framework or rooftop of peace that was laid by the blood of Christians and the sweat of Christians. Now, what's my evidence? Who are this century of Christian peacemakers? By the way, I almost skipped over Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker is a professor at Harvard who's the leading theorist on the decline of violence in the world. And Steven Pinker, in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, has said that Christianity played no role in the decline of violence because Christianity preaches the afterlife and has people not focused on this life. See if you agree with Steven Pinker, the brilliant professor at Harvard, after we look at these historical facts. We start with hospitals. There were hospitals, individual hospitals, but the first network of hospitals were created by the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, where the bishops were told, every place you have a cathedral, you must have a hospital. And what was so amazing about these hospitals was they began to take care of lepers. Now, leprosy is contagious. And the non-Christians would say to each other, those Christians are starting hospitals, and they're taking care of lepers. And somebody would say, well, that can't be right. Leprosy is contagious. And they said, yeah, they're taking care of lepers, even though it's contagious. So that's why we have hospitals, because of the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century. I'm going to run through these quick, but you can study them. St. Augustus created just war theory. Before the 6th century, the concept of a war was, if you can take land, you'll have more to eat, you'll have more riches. It was a good idea. He created the concept that you could only fight a war if there was a just basis for it, like self-defense, or to better the world. Monks and nuns really created the network of universities. There was a university in Egypt. There were universities in India. But the network of universities was created by Christians. John Locke laid the underpinnings of democracy. He was a devout Christian. He used the concept of both the Old and the New Testament and said to himself, if man is made in God's image, then man deserves to pick his leaders. And that was the beginnings of democracy. Now people say to me, come on, democracy, that's a secular concept. You can't claim that for Christianity. Sometime Google a list of the countries in the world that are democratic, and then Google a list of the countries in the world that are Christian, or have had a strong Christian influence, like India, where the British laid the foundation. They almost overlap. The just punishment concept, the idea that you didn't punish just for revenge, but you punished to create a better person, for deterrence, to create a better world, was by Cesare Beccaria in the 18th century. Again, a devout Christian. William Blackstone in England created the civil law system, a devout Christian. Thomas Jefferson's interesting. He was a deist. He didn't believe that Jesus was divine, but he followed Christian principles, as he says, better than any Christian. And he actually created his own Bible, which was only the sayings of Jesus, because he thought the rest was irrelevant. But Thomas Jefferson, who followed Christian principles, created the American system of government. William Wilberforce abolished slavery. I mean, he literally was the person who most pressed to abolish slavery in England, and led to the abolition of slavery long before Abraham Lincoln here. And he did it by pressing the British and saying, if you are a Christian, you can't believe in slavery. You can't support slavery. He also created the ASPCA, Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. This woman, who completely rejected the church but was a devout Christian, she actually created a women's Christian Bible, was one of two people who started the women's right to vote movement. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, based on her devotion to Christianity, even though she didn't support everything the church did. Florence Nightingale created the nursing profession, a devout Christian, during the Crimean War. Henry Dunant, and the interesting thing about him is he had C's and D's in school, so there's hope for everybody. Won the first Nobel Peace Prize and created the Geneva Convention, the agreement to end torture in the 19th century. And he was a devout Christian. It's interesting because people say, well, who led the civil rights movement? Martin Luther King. That's not right. The Reverend Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement, along with the Reverend Wyatt Walker and the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It was Christians who led the way to the change in civil rights in our country. Father Jerzy Popilusko, probably, I'm sure I say his name wrong, and John Paul II. How many people have heard of Father Jerzy? Interesting. Father Jerzy was a priest in Poland. He was a young priest, and he was called, and they needed a priest to go to the shipyard when the Solidarity movement was fighting communism. And the other priest was busy, so the young priest had to go. And he went and he became the spiritual leader of the rebellion against communism and against Soviet rule. 11 times he was brought in for interrogation by the Polish authorities. Twice they blew up his car. In both cases, he wasn't hurt. But he refused to stop speaking out for freedom. Finally, they caught up with him in his car and they killed him. And the authorities, you can imagine, said to themselves, well, we got rid of that troublemaker. These people are really going to be afraid of us now. They probably won't even come to his funeral. Well, they held his funeral and church was full, kind of like this. In fact, not only was the church full, the town was full. Not only was the town full, there were 400,000 people who came to his funeral. And communism could never get its hold back. And Pope John Paul II, as I'm sure you know, played a leading role in that as well. But Father Jerzy started it. This woman Lema Gabawi was a Christian in Liberia, and they were having a civil war between the Christians and the Muslims. And this is very recent. This is in the 2000s. And it went on for decades. There's an incredible movie called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Pray the Devil Back to Hell. It's a documentary that you have to see. She brought the Christian women and the Muslim women together and said, we're done with this war. They actually went on a sex strike, refused to have sex with their husbands if they continued to fight. They dressed in white, and they lined the road, and they had a corrupt guy named Charles Taylor, and they lined the road, and they refused to move until they ended the Civil War. And she also won the Nobel Peace Prize. But she brought, amazingly enough, Christian women and Muslim women together and ended this decades-long civil war in Liberia. Pope Francis, we hope for great things, but he's about to put out a statement on just ecology. He's already spoke on the just economy. And if peace with justice is your goal, then he may be the next important leader. So I say, if these people who think that Christianity hasn't done much or is a bunch of phonies, and that religion is the cause of all the world's problems, well, think of a world with no hospitals, with indiscriminate war because you didn't care about just war, with no universities, without democracy, indiscriminate punishment, no civil law system, slavery, no women's right to vote, no nursing, torture, still a lack of civil rights in the South, widespread communist control, or an unjust economy. These are all things in which Christians have played a leading role.